Okay, picking up where we left off, we're on page 112. We're talking about cache memory. So it's a buffer between something fast and something slow. You throw a cache in between and it helps speed things along. That's all. Okay. The next term they're going to be talking about is, okay. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but this is not bad. So inside the CPU are things called registers, and they are really, really fast. Cache memory is kind of in the middle, and then you have standard, and they're giving you all the lists of different types of RAMs. So basically, I kind of need a cache between this and this, and I need a cache between that and that. And so there's different levels of cache. Okay. All right. Read only, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Some of this stuff is kind of straightforward. When you buy a machine, and it actually has some sort of storage which you can't normally change, and a lot of people call the most machines is called a BIOS. So, it's a basic input-output system thing, and you probably heard flashing the BIOS, which means I get an update from the manufacturer. I run this little thing, and it temporarily makes my read-only memory available, writes to it, and then shuts it back down. So it's not, most read-only memory these days is not read-only, it's locked down. So that normally, under 99% of the time, it's read-only, and only when you want it to, which is once in a blue moon, you can crack open the case, so to speak, and put new stuff in and then seal it back up. So yes, there was things at one time. There was a thing called real honest-to-God read-only memory, but those aren't being made now. They're all erasable, programmable, but we still call them ROM. Okay, let's continue. The next thing I talk about is multiprocessing. And so the idea is I have a task that I want done, and so it's going to take this amount of time to do it. I could do it on two machines, and then each one would take this amount of time. That's the concept, is that if I have a long-running task, if I had more computers, I could break the task apart, and it could run faster. Now, in reality, it's not that perfect, okay? For example, doubling the number of processors is not going to cut the execution time in half, all right? Only under very, very strange circumstances would that ever be true. But almost all processors now, even the stuff that comes on your phone, have multi-processors. And so the idea is that instead of taking a single task and having it split between 2 or 3 or 4 processors, which is a little kind of complicated, most multiprocessing systems don't do that. They just say, well, if you have 5 tasks running on your computer, okay, we'll put 3 of them over here and we'll put 2 of them over here. That's multitasking, but not quite the same. So multitasking basically means more processors. All right, now let me tell you a story. So not that long ago, we were buying a bunch of computers for our folks, and we had some people running a CAD application like AutoCAD, so computer-aided drafting, and we had a scenario where you could get a 4-core processor, had 4 processors in it at 3.2 gigahertz, or you can get one with 2 processors at 3.3 gigahertz. Okay, so you'd have 4 cores at 3.2 or 2 cores at 3.3. And the CAD folks says, we'll take the one with smaller number of cores but a faster speed because our application is not multitasking aware. Okay? Whoa, really? Your CAD application can't break up into separate pieces? And they said, nope. It's okay then. Then you get the faster processor, but fewer number of processing cores. All right. So, bottom line is, to make this work really, really well, it takes a combination of hardware and software. If your software is not multi-processing aware, well, then you're kind of wasting your time. Multiprocessors won't help you at all. Okay, cool. So, it gets a little complicated when you're talking about how many cores you have in your computer. For example, I've got a machine that's got 6 processing cores. However, they have this really goofy way, it's called hyperthreading, that makes it look like I have twice as many physical cores that I have. So once again, when you're reading the brochure and it says 4 cores, you really need to kind of be thinking, is that 4 actual cores? Or is that 4 cores, that are, 2 of them are real and 2 of them are imaginary? It's kind of a weird scenario. All right, so my machine, I have 6 cores and 12 total cores available to my machine. So I can run 12 threads. I know that's a weird term. 12 things simultaneously, even though I only have 6 cores to do it. Okay, I think that's boring enough. Let's continue. The next thing to talk about is parallel computing. Now, parallel computing was the first thing I talked about, where you take a single task and you break it up into small pieces and you send it through. Now, this is fairly rare, and most people don't have parallel computing kind of stuff at home. If you're a researcher or something, maybe you might have a machine that's specifically designed for this. But most home computers have the capacity to do this, but typically do not. They don't break a single task into multiple processors. They just say, you got 37 things going on, and I'll just put 6 over here and 6 over here and 6 over here and just move on down the line. Okay, so the difference between parallel computing and multitasking or multiprocessing is whether or not I've got a single thing broken up or just have multiple things just assigned to different processors. Okay, so this is very, very specialized software, and you would only run it, we're not talking about anything you've ever heard of. Okay, we're not talking about like an Excel spreadsheet or anything like that. We're talking about really, really strange software that researchers are going to be using. Okay. Now, you don't have to have a strange researcher to do grid computing. So grid computing is very similar to parallel computing, but there's some really weird opportunities for you to actually participate in grid computing. So grid computing means I've got a ton of data that needs to be processed. I could process all the data myself, or I could just carve off a chunk and send the chunk of this data over here and a chunk of this data. Now, each processor is not running on the same data. They've all been giving a small piece. So when your data is massive, grid computing makes sense. Now, let's say you had 4 computers participating. Well, chunk number 1 is being running on PC number 1, and chunk number 3 is running on PC number 3. So they're all processing different data. It's not quite the same as multiprocessing where you're sharing the same thread. These are completely independent. It doesn't matter if processor number 1 over here is twice as fast as machine 4, because in grid computing, the work has been broken up into chunks and everyone's working on their chunk. So it doesn't really matter if they don't have to be synchronized. They don't have to be obtaining the answer at the same time. Now, you can do this at home. There are quite a few people out there that have tremendous processing requirements and don't have the amount of processing that takes it. One of them is SETI. Have you heard the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, the SETI organization? They collect signal data from the sky, and yet they don't have the processing power to be able to do it all. So what they do is they take chunks of the data, send it to your machine at home. Yes, your machine at home, and it processes the signal data and then says, okay, I've processed it. I didn't find anything. And so it says, give me another chunk. And so it gives you another chunk. Now, there could be thousands of computers out there running SETI at home to do that. There's another one called the folding. And this is a little more complicated to describe, but we often know what the chemical makeup of a protein is. But when we figure out the chemical makeup of a protein, it's one long chain, an oxygen molecule, a carbon molecule, and it's one long gargantuan chain. But in reality, they don't live as a chain. They live as a clump, all clumped together. And so we need to figure out how the protein is folded onto itself. All right. And so it's a lot of processing power. and it takes an awful lot of work. And so you can generate on the folding team. You can generate spare CPU. What a lot of people do is like when your screensaver kicks in on your computer, meaning that you're no longer using your computer for anything useful, like you walked away or something. That's when the SETI at home or the folding at home would kick in and chew your machine up. I will tell you that I did it once. I had a brand new computer with a super duper graphics card, and I put my graphics card in there, and I participated in the folding. And it uses my graphics processor for doing all this work. And so I let it run. I took off, went to bed. The next morning I got up, walked in the computer room, my office, and it was like 100 degrees in there. Like, wow! It ran all night and really consumed an awful lot of power and generated one hell of a lot of heat. Okay, enough of my goofy stories. Let's continue. The next thing we're going to talk about is secondary storage. Now, remember, primary storage is the RAM. That's that volatile stuff. So it's transient. As soon as you turn the computer off, poof, it's gone. Well, clearly that's not going to work in the real world. I need other stuff that doesn't go away. I need non-transient. I need permanent storage. Okay, that's what secondary storage is all about. So basically, non-volatile means it keeps the data when the power is out. That's what that basically means. And the reason why we have this is that the cost of storage is coming down, okay? But it's cheaper than the amount of available RAM. In other words, if I said I want to buy a terabyte hard drive, well, you could just go down to the local Best Buy and plunk down, probably somewhere around $70, less than $100 for a terabyte hard drive. If you went to Best Buy and said, I'd like to buy a terabyte of RAM, they would go, what, are you nuts? Okay, because that would be, first of all, it would be a whole box full of RAM, and you wouldn't never be able to fit it physically into your machine. Plus, it would cost one heck of a lot more than a hard drive. So hard drives are cheap compared to RAM. Okay. They go into an awful lot of detail here, which I think is kind of weird. One of the things that they talk about is access methods. So, in the old days, I always loved the science fiction shows that show the tape drives. The old bank of computers, they have a little tape drive, and it's going, it's turning, big reels of real tapes. Okay. That's what's called sequential access, which means if I'm over here on this part of the tape, and I want to go to over here on this part of the tape, I have no choice but to read all the rest of it until I got there. So, sequential access is usually pretty fast if the next thing you want is really immediately adjacent to wherever you're currently doing. But if you want to fast forward, so to speak, or rewind, well then, no. I mean, if you're playing, you guys probably can't remember cassette tapes or VCR tapes, but you know what I'm talking about is, you want to fast forward a VCR tape, you push a little button, you lift your finger up and it would stop where you wanted it. That's sequential access. We hardly have any examples of sequential access today, with the possible exception of tape drives for doing computer backups. Okay. About everything else is direct access. So direct access is like, hard drives and solid state disks and flash drives, everything else you've ever heard of, because the computer can very easily just jump around from different spots on that disk and without any trouble at all. It doesn't take it hardly any effort at all to move from one spot to another. Unlike I'm at the first part of a tape and I need to read the last part of the tape, it might take a minute for it to get all the way there. Okay. So let's continue. I'm going to kind of talk through some of this, but a lot of the storage devices are kind of simple. Magnetic is magnetic tape or magnetic storage is still a prevalent use of a secondary storage, although solid state stuff is coming up in popularity. Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.